Hey guys, what's up? So you're probably thinking to yourself like, yeah, Amish, top 5 places to invade. That's a great idea for a video. Great idea back in 2016. And you wouldn't be completely wrong. Obviously, a video like this would have been much more helpful early on, but there are a lot of new players that still come into the game. I still get questions about levels to invade. What are the best levels? What soul levels do you recommend? And I thought it'd be fun to kind of condense all that information in one location. I will be including recommended soul level ranges too, which I think can be really helpful. And in some cases, we'll talk about weapon levels, which can definitely give you a decisive advantage. Very often, you're going to have to make a trade-off between quantity of invasions and the advantages that you have in the invasion. Obviously, if you try to go out to the tail end of weapon upgrade advantages, then you're going to have an advantage more often than not, but you're also going to get a lot fewer invasions. So these days, especially, it depends on your skill level. I personally try to pick kind of middle of the pack, but you could definitely put yourself at a disadvantage too and get a lot more invasions as a result. Obviously, for folks that use wax dust, something like this isn't as valuable, though I think if you're still trying to target specific areas outside of wax dust, it can be helpful. I'm purposely leaving the Ring City and Pontiff out of this discussion. Those places are unique. They're unlike anything else. They really don't belong in a top 5 invasion locations. I mean, either you love those places or you hate them. You don't need a guide like this to tell you that. When the game first came out, all my builds were 125. I could take a 125 and I could go invade anywhere. Actually, they're probably 120, not 125. And I distinctly remember in 2017 having a conversation with Saint Riot and Pinko about slowly deleting a lot of my 120s and replacing them with builds targeted at specific levels and areas. And I predict that that's going to become ever more of an issue as time goes on. Plus, if you're trying to avoid the glitch meta, you really don't have much of a choice than to invade outside of 120. Really, too, new game traversal isn't what it used to be. Before the DLCs came out, the base game only had 8 slabs. People didn't have as many upgraded weapons to drop and a mule, so it was very common to go into New Game Plus. Nowadays, almost nobody does, so it's very rare to find people at like 120 going through the game again. So it's really important that for these areas, you pick the appropriate level and weapon reinforcement level. Okay, so let's actually go and take a look at the levels. And I want to just share a little bit of information. I didn't actually score these levels. Like, I didn't sit down and come up, and give each one a score in different areas and then add it up. I already knew which ones were my favorites. But as a general guideline, the things that I'm thinking of that make a level good or bad: PvE support, that's huge. The ease with which players can rush the boss fog levels where people can do that, definitely not as much fun. The level layout and general aesthetics, is it cool? Does it look fun? Whether the area is optional or not, and this really goes to how many players you expect to find there. Is it a difficult level? Do you see a lot of co-opers there? Obviously, more co-opers means more invasion fun. Spawn locations. Spawn locations a big deal, can really penalize the level. There's certain levels that I would probably like but don't invade just because the spawns are so bad. And also whether you're likely to get a second invader if it's a large enough party. So with that in mind, guys, let's go ahead and take a look at the list. Okay, so coming in at number 5, one of my favorites, Cathedral of the Deep. This has long been one of my favorite places to invade. I really enjoy the aesthetics of this area. It's massive. There's plenty of shortcuts. There's lots of verticality. There's lots of ways to get advantages against parties. There's plenty of opportunities for shenanigans, whether you're going up on the buttresses or whether you're in the rafters up above the entirety of the Cathedral of the Deep. Just a tremendous place to learn. You can get engaged in all kinds of types of invasions while you're here. It's just a great place for beginners to start and learn about. And of course, you can get invasions here at any soul level. 20 to 50 seems to be the sweet spot. Cathedral of the Deep is one of the first locations that really has the forking path issue, where hosts can either come here directly from Crucifixion Woods, or they can go into the catacombs first, in fact all the way up to central Irithyl before the fog wall will force them back into the Cathedral of the Deep. So the soul level invasion range here is much wider than it would be for a lot of other early locations. I find as early as 20, as late as soul level 50, and sometimes even a bit higher. Those are really great, and you can even have multiple builds that target this area, and depending on whether the party went to the catacombs first or not will dictate which ones you get. The way the level loops back on itself makes it easier to catch up to parties that may be much further into the level, and you can cover actually a wide area of this level as you're going investigating, trying to track down parties. The bad side, I would say, first of all, this tends to be one of the favored locations for hosts that just want to hide and maybe put on Way of Blue. If a host really wants to hide here, you're not going to find them. It's next to impossible to find hosts that want to hide. But the other problem here is that ganks will sometimes hang out by the bonfire, and there's really no good way to kick them out and force them to play the level. You don't have coverage over the whole room with a great bow. I can't tell you how many times I've been forced into the bonfire room in a 3v1, 4v1, or 4v2 if you have a co-invader, and that can be pretty difficult to fight. Recommended weapons. Every level you can play every weapon. It's not like you have to have certain weapons for specific areas, but sometimes certain weapons do lend themselves better to certain areas, and this is one of them. So there is a lot of natural bleed in the environment. A lot of the enemies do bleed damage. Some of the enemies even just do continued bleed over time with the maggots. So any weapon that does bleed damage will work out really well here. And similarly, you want to avoid weapons that do fire damage, because you'll often end up resetting the bleed that's already building up on players, and they don't have the blood muffins to treat it, so you really want to let that bleed stay. For the same reason, poison's a really good approach because people won't be able to cure the poison. Recommend that. All in all, if I'm advising new players and they want to start invading, if they're not going to invade with, let's say, watchdogs, this would be the place where I would tell people to go. Okay, so next up I want to talk about Irithyl Dungeon and Profane Flame, and mostly Irithyl Dungeon. I just kind of included Profane Flame because the levels are connected, and obviously during an invasion you can move freely from one to the other. The PvE support here is amazing, especially the jailers. The jailers can really catch a party off guard. Of course, they've got the HP reduction from their gaze, and not only does it obviously take their health away, but it lowers their max HP. And that can cause parties to really start to panic, or if they get hit by the branding iron, then they're going to fat roll. Lots of opportunities for chaos here. This is a really popular area to invade, and I'm not sure if that's just because it's easy to find invasions here, which is really the primary reason I like to come here. It's always reliable in terms of finding invasions, but I think a lot of my co-invaders seem to like this area more than I do. I'm not overly fond of invading in the dungeon, and I'll talk about what some of those reasons are, but it's important to remember that it's always active. So an invasion here is better than no invasion somewhere else. So something to always keep in mind. It's very reliable for mid-level invasions. This is a classic mid-level invasion spot. Now, there's a few things that I don't like about this area. I'll talk about a few of them. The narrow hallways. The narrow hallways to me are a big advantage for the home team. They're a disadvantage for you, and especially if you have a co-invader. It can make it very difficult to separate parties, to separate phantoms from the host. And Profane Flame really isn't, in my view, all that great. Especially, Profane Flame either goes to the boss or it goes off to the area with the NPC. And in either case, there just isn't that much PvE around, so it won't take a party very long to take out the PvE, and then they can focus entirely on you. And I've had a lot of fights up on top of the building there where the NPC is. It's a very small area, and it's easy to get rushed down by parties. So actually, I'm not that big a fan of Profane Flame, but again, it is a pretty active area. It is pretty reliable. You will find a lot of co-invaders there. The other problem with Irithyl Dungeon, that first spawn location where the bonfire is, and then you've got that really long hallway until you get to the first patrolling jailer. It's tough if you've got a party that doesn't want to move out of that hallway. They've got a very good spot to defend, especially if they're near the bonfire. They're elevated, and it's a very narrow entrance there. So really just not a good place if you want to try to flank. Now, with another co-invader, you can flank them from both the front and the rear, so the entrance coming in from Pontiff, and then the bottom coming in from the dungeon itself, and that can help sometimes. So again, not an area I'm overly fond of, but because it is so popular and it is so busy, it definitely deserves to be here on the list. Okay, next up is one of my personal favorites, and that would be Dragon Barracks, and really just, Lothar Castle more broadly. You can find players at many different soul levels here. You can find players that are sequence breaking, they're going to beat the answer early, and they may rush Lothric Castle in an attempt to get some early chunks. Usually the sweet spot here though for players is somewhere between about soul level 60 and soul level 80, though of course you will find players here up at soul level 90, at soul level 100, all the way up through meta, and of course beyond. I actually only invaded this bonfire dragon barracks for probably the first 4 or 5 months that I was invading, and I spent a lot of time invading, and I just was never motivated to go anywhere else. I really love the area, I love the fights that I would get into. I had my main hand Yorms, my offhand buckler, I was ready to rock. Once I started invading a lot of other places, I didn't come back here for a while, but these days I still spend a lot of time invading here, and I still really like it. The PvE support here is about as good as it gets. When the Lothric Knights have their buff up, like with Blessed Weapon, they are truly fearsome and dangerous. And of course, adding on to that, you have the priest that will buff them with Sacred Oath, and the Sacred Oath that they get buffed with is so much stronger than the version that you can use in the game. And of course, the priest will also buff you with Sacred Oath. I know from experience fighting these knights that the amount of damage they take is roughly halved when they have that particular buff up, and the damage they deal is about twice as much. And especially without Embered Health, those Lothric Knights have a real quick 1-2 attack that they can do, these quick slashing attacks that is pretty much a one-shot, even in New Game, to say nothing of deeper New Game levels where they can one-shot you even with Embered Health. So truly fearsome. Lots of gauntlets that you can put the host and their party through. I really do like to build it or to invade in this area. And if you happen to have like a buff build, like think about Adam's Warmancer, that's a really great example. If you have a build that depends on buffs for damage, then this is a really fun place to invade, because you can get the priest to buff you with Sacred Oath and take your damage numbers into ridiculous levels, and you can really catch parties off guard that maybe aren't expecting you to do the kind of damage that you're able to do. So the downsides of this area, one of the downsides is that some of the very best enemies, like the Pus of Man and the fire-breathing dragons on the bridge, they can hit you as an invader, of course, not just the party. That can be a challenge, especially the fire-breathing dragon. I know I always keep a main hand Cestus on me specifically for this area. I actually do that more generally now in all my builds, but I used to make a specific point of doing it when I would invade here. The other problem is if that party has that long elevator shortcut open, they can rush the boss fog, which will happen a lot of times. They'll rush the boss before you're actually able to confront them. And similarly, a lot of players will summon for this boss fight. So very often when you invade, you'll be outside a party of 3 or 4 players. They're really just looking to go to the boss. They may fight you, but as soon as it looks like they have any chance of losing, they'll typically just leave and go to the boss. So that can be kind of irritating to deal with too. But again, just a fantastic area to invade, and still probably one of my personal favorites. Okay guys, I've made the decision to go ahead and split this into 2 separate videos just because it was getting to be way too long. Stay tuned for part 2 here coming shortly. Also, I'm going to be doing a series of videos on my 5 least favorite places to invade, so be sure to stick around for that. Hope you guys come back for part 2. Thanks and take care now.